The billionaire came home early to surprise his wife. But as Clinton Whitfield approached the living room, a hand shot out from the darkness and gripped his wrist. Grace, the black maid who had served his household for 8 years, pressed a trembling finger to her lips. "Don't talk," she whispered. Through the gap in the door, Clinton saw his wife surrounded by strangers, stacks of cash syringes, and heard her cold voice discussing tonight. His phone buzzed. His wife's name lit up the screen, and Clinton realized if he made a single sound, he might never leave this house alive. 2 days. Clinton Whitfield had finished the Chicago deal 2 full days ahead of schedule. As his private jet touched down at the local airstrip, he had already decided not to call Victoria. After 3 years of marriage, he wanted to see that genuine spark of surprise in her eyes when he walked through the door unannounced. The drive home took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads. The Whitfield estate sat perched above the valley, a sprawling mansion that Clinton had built from the ground up after his real estate empire crossed the billion-dollar threshold. He had designed every corner of this house with his first wife, Ulani. When she passed away from what doctors called sudden cardiac arrest, Clinton thought he would never set foot in the master bedroom again. Then Victoria came along. She had been Ulani's closest friend during those final months, always visiting, always bringing flowers, always holding Ulani's hand when Clinton was away on business. After the funeral, Victoria had stayed close, helping Clinton navigate his grief with patience and grace. 1 year later, they were married. Now, pulling up to the front gate at 10 in the evening, Clinton noticed something strange. The 2 guards standing at the entrance were unfamiliar faces. Where was Derek, his head of security, who had been with him for over a decade? Clinton lowered his window. "Where's Derek tonight?" The taller guard stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mr. Thompson is on personal leave, sir. Family emergency. Mrs. Whitfield approved our temporary assignment." Something about the explanation felt rehearsed, but Clinton dismissed the thought. Victoria was always thorough about household matters. He nodded and drove through parking in the rear lot behind the east wing rather than the main garage. It was an old habit from when Ulani was alive. She used to wait for him in the kitchen with warm tea, and he would sneak in through the back door to surprise her. The mansion was unusually quiet as Clinton entered through the service entrance. Most of the staff had been dismissed for the night, which was not uncommon on Fridays. He moved silently through the kitchen past the dining hall, heading toward the main staircase that would take him to the master bedroom. That was when he heard the voices. They drifted from the living room at the end of the corridor. Low, measured, deliberate. Clinton recognized his wife's tone immediately, but there was something different about it. A coldness he had never heard before. He took a step toward the door. A hand shot out from the shadows and seized his wrist with surprising strength. Clinton spun around ready to strike, but stopped when he saw who it was. Grace Johnson, the black maid who had served the Whitfield household for 8 years. She had been with them since before Ulani's death, a quiet presence who moved through the house like a shadow, never speaking unless spoken to. Her eyes were wide with terror, but beneath the fear, Clinton saw something else. Resolve. "Don't talk," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't move. Just listen." Clinton wanted to demand an explanation. He was a billionaire in his own home. No one told him what to do. But something in Grace's expression made him hesitate. She had never once overstepped her position in 8 years. For her to grab him like this, something had to be terribly wrong. Grace pointed toward the gap in the living room door. Clinton leaned closer and listened. "He gets back Sunday night." Victoria's voice floated through the opening, casual and businesslike. "That gives us 48 hours to prepare everything." A man responded, his tone clinical and detached. "The dosage I've prepared will present as a standard myocardial infarction. No autopsy would find anything suspicious." Clinton felt his blood turn to ice. He knew that voice. Dr. Leonard Hayes, the family physician who had been treating the Whitfields for years, the same doctor who had signed Ulani's death certificate. Through the narrow gap, Clinton could see his wife sitting on the leather sofa surrounded by 3 men he did not recognize. A briefcase lay open on the coffee table, revealing stacks of cash and several medical vials. Dr. Hayes stood nearby, holding a syringe up to the light, examining its contents with professional interest. Victoria picked up one of the vials and turned it in her fingers. "This needs to be cleaner than last time." Last time. The words hit Clinton like a physical blow. His knees nearly buckled. What did she mean last time? When had they done this before? His phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen lit up with Victoria's name. She was calling him from inside the living room, probably checking when he would arrive so they could finalize their timeline. Clinton silenced the phone with trembling fingers. Grace tugged at his sleeve and gestured toward a storage closet further down the hallway. Moving with painstaking care, they slipped inside and Grace eased the door shut behind them. The closet was cramped and dark, filled with cleaning supplies and spare linens. Clinton could barely breathe. His mind was reeling, trying to process what he had just witnessed. "What is happening?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "What did she mean by last time?" Grace's face was partially illuminated by the faint light seeping under the door. When she spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of a secret she had carried for far too long. "They did this before, Mr. Whitfield, to Mrs. Ulani." Clinton grabbed her shoulders. "What are you talking about?" "Your first wife didn't die from a heart attack," Grace said. "They killed her. Victoria and Dr. Hayes. They poisoned her slowly over months, made it look natural. I didn't have proof back then, but I knew something was wrong. Mrs. Ulani was getting better, and then suddenly she wasn't." The storage closet seemed to shrink around Clinton. He released Grace and pressed his back against the wall, fighting the urge to vomit. "That's impossible," he breathed. "Victoria was Ulani's best friend. She was devastated when Ulani died." "She was playing a role, sir. She's been playing it for years." Grace reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old smartphone, the kind that hadn't been manufactured in half a decade. "2 years ago, I started listening, recording, keeping notes. I needed proof before I could say anything." She turned on the phone and navigated to an audio file. The recording was grainy, filled with static, but the voices were unmistakable. Victoria's voice came through the tiny speaker. "Ulani was too easy. She trusted me completely. Clinton is different, more suspicious. But that's fine. We have 3 years to prepare." Dr. Hayes responded, "The same compound will work. We just need to adjust the dosage for his body weight." Clinton listened to the recording twice. By the end, his hands had stopped shaking. The shock was crystallizing into something harder, colder. He looked at Grace with new eyes. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do all this? Why risk your life?" Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Mrs. Ulani saved my daughter's life. 8 years ago, my little girl needed surgery that I could never afford. Mrs. Ulani paid for everything without being asked. She told me that people should help each other because it's the right thing to do." Grace's voice cracked slightly. "She was the only person in this house who ever treated me like family. I couldn't let her death mean nothing, and I couldn't let you die the same way." Clinton closed his eyes and saw Ulani's face. Her warm smile, the way she always made sure the staff were treated with dignity. He had mourned her for a year before Victoria swooped in with her comfort and her beauty and her lies. 3 years. He had shared a bed with his wife's killer for 3 years. "If I walk into that living room right now," Clinton said slowly, "what happens? Victoria will act surprised and happy to see you. She'll say you look exhausted from travel. Dr. Hayes will offer to give you something to help you relax." Grace shook her head. "You won't make it to morning. And if I try to leave the house..." The 2 guards at the gate work for her now. Derek is gone. The security system codes were changed last week. Victoria controls everything. Grace held up the phone. This is all the evidence I have. 23 recordings, photographs of the medications, my own notes. If we can get this to someone who can help, we can stop them." Clinton stared at the phone in her hand. His entire empire, his billions of dollars, his army of lawyers and accountants and security personnel meant nothing inside these walls. Victoria had spent 3 years hollowing out his defenses from within, and he had been too blind to see it. "Derek checks his phone every morning at 6, Grace continued. "It's a habit. If we can survive until then, we can send him everything. He's loyal to you, Mr. Whitfield. I know he is." Clinton checked his watch. It was just past 10:30. They had more than 7 hours until 6 in the morning. 7 hours of hiding in his own home from a woman who had murdered his first wife and was now planning to murder him. He thought about storming into the living room and confronting Victoria, demanding answers, using his physical strength to overpower Hayes and the others. But even as the fantasy played out in his mind, he knew it was suicide. Victoria had planned every detail. She would simply claim he had suffered a mental breakdown, and Hayes would sedate him before he could prove otherwise. No, he had to be smarter than that. "Where can we hide?" Clinton asked. Before Grace could answer, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Someone was walking past the storage closet, moving toward the living room. They held their breath until the footsteps faded. Grace whispered, "There's a space in the laundry room behind the industrial dryers. I've hidden things there for years. No one ever checks it." Clinton nodded. For the first time in his life, he was putting his survival in the hands of a woman he had barely noticed for 8 years. The maid who moved through his house like a ghost. The only person in this mansion who actually wanted him to live. "Lead the way," he said. They moved through the darkened corridors like ghosts. Grace knew every inch of the mansion, every creaking floorboard to avoid every blind spot in the security camera coverage. Clinton followed close behind his expensive Italian shoes, making too much noise against the marble floors. The laundry room was located in the basement level, accessible through a narrow staircase near the kitchen. Grace led him down the steps past rows of industrial washing machines and dryers to a corner hidden behind a massive water heater. A small gap existed between the machinery and the wall, just wide enough for 2 people to squeeze through. "I've been hiding things here for 2 years, Grace whispered as they settled into the cramped space. "The cameras don't cover this area. Victoria thinks it's just storage." Clinton leaned against the concrete wall, his mind still struggling to accept the reality of his situation. 12 hours ago, he had been closing a $200 million deal in Chicago. Now he was hiding in his own basement, hunted by his own wife. "Show me everything," he said. Grace pulled out the old smartphone and began navigating through folders. She had organized the evidence, meticulously dating each file and adding notes about context. Clinton watched as she opened photograph after photograph. Medical vials with labels he didn't recognize. Prescription pads signed by Dr. Hayes for medications that were never disclosed to Clinton. A calendar with dates circled in red corresponding to times when Ulani's health had suddenly declined. "I started noticing things right after Mrs. Ulani's funeral," Grace explained quietly. "Victoria moved into the house so quickly. She knew exactly where everything was, like she had been studying the layout for months. And Dr. Hayes started coming around more often, always when you were away on business." And Clinton scrolled through the audio files. There were 23 recordings in total, spanning 2 years of secret conversations. He selected one from 6 months ago and pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the small space, tinny but clear. "The will is already in my favor. 70% of everything goes to me if he dies. Leonard, we just need to be patient." Dr. Hayes responded, "The compound I'm developing is untraceable. It mimics natural heart failure perfectly. We can administer it gradually through his vitamin supplements, just like we did with Ulani." Clinton stopped the recording. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. A cold rage was building in his chest, the kind of anger that made men do reckless things. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. "How did you record all of this without getting caught?" he asked. Grace pointed to the ceiling of the laundry room. There's a vent that connects to the study on the first floor. Sound travels straight down. Victoria and Dr. Hayes always had their private conversations in the study because they thought it was the most secure room in the house. They never imagined anyone would be listening from below. The irony was not lost on Clinton. His wife had taken over his home, his security, his entire life. But she had overlooked the one person who moved through the house unnoticed. The invisible maid who washed their clothes and cleaned their floors and heard everything. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Clinton asked. "Why wait until now?" Grace's expression darkened. "I tried, Mr. Whitfield. A year ago, I gathered my courage and went to the station. I told them everything, showed them some of the recordings." She shook her head bitterly. "They didn't believe me. A black maid accusing a wealthy white woman of murder, they thought I was trying to extort the family. One of the officers even called Victoria to report what I had said." Clinton felt sick. "What happened?" "Victoria confronted me that night. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just smiled and told me that if I ever tried something like that again, she would make sure my daughter's medical records showed a history of drug abuse. She said no hospital would ever treat her again." Grace's voice hardened. "My daughter is only 16, Mr. Whitfield. She's never touched drugs in her life, but I knew Victoria could make those records appear. She has Dr. Hayes in her pocket. She has connections everywhere." So Grace had been trapped just like Clinton was trapped now, forced to watch in silence as Victoria prepared to claim another victim. Clinton checked his phone. It was nearly 11:30. Still more than 6 hours until Derek might check his messages. The battery indicator showed 18% remaining, enough to send a few messages, but not enough for a long call. "We need to conserve this," he muttered, dimming the screen. That was when they heard the commotion upstairs. Footsteps, multiple pairs moving quickly across the floor above them. Then Victoria's voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the muffled sounds. "His car is in the back lot. He's here. Find him." Clinton and Grace exchanged a look of pure dread. Someone had discovered his vehicle parked behind the east wing. The element of surprise was gone. The footsteps spread out, some heading toward the upper floors, others moving toward the kitchen. Clinton pressed himself deeper into the shadows behind the water heater, hardly daring to breathe. "They'll search the basement eventually," Grace whispered. "How long do we have?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. This house has 60 rooms. It will take them time to check everywhere." Clinton's mind raced through options. He could try to slip out through one of the service exits, but the guards at the gate would stop him. He could attempt to overpower whoever came down to the basement, but there were at least 5 people in the house working with Victoria. He could call the police, but after what Grace had told him, he wasn't sure they would believe him either. His phone buzzed. Victoria's name appeared on the screen again. This time, instead of ignoring the call, Clinton answered. He needed to buy time to understand what she knew. "Clinton, darling." Victoria's voice was honey-sweet, dripping with false concern. "Where are you?" "The guards told me you arrived an hour ago, but I can't find you anywhere. I'm getting worried." Clinton kept his voice steady. "I came in through the back. I wasn't feeling well, so I went to lie down in one of the guest rooms." "Which guest room, sweetheart? I'll come check on you." "The one in the east wing, 3rd floor." A brief silence on the other end. Clinton knew Victoria was signaling to her people, directing them toward the east wing, while she continued the charade. "Stay right there," she said warmly. "I'll bring you some tea. Dr. Hayes is here tonight, actually. He can take a look at you if you're not feeling well." "That won't be necessary." "Nonsense. You sound exhausted. Just wait for me, okay?" The line went dead. Clinton turned to Grace. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize I'm not in the east wing. Is there another way out of this basement?" Grace shook her head. "Only the stairs we came down, but there's a storage room at the far end with a heavy door. If we can get there and lock ourselves in, we might be able to hold them off until morning." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. Clinton nodded, and they began moving through the darkness toward the far end of the basement. They almost made it. Grace was 3 steps ahead of Clinton when the basement lights blazed on. One of Victoria's guards stood at the bottom of the staircase, blocking their escape route. He was young, muscular, and armed with a handgun. "Found them!" he called up the stairs. Clinton grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her toward the storage room, but a second guard appeared from behind a row of shelving units, cutting off their path. Within seconds, they were surrounded. Victoria descended the stairs slowly, her high heels clicking against each step. She was dressed in a cream-colored silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless even at nearly midnight. She looked like a woman hosting a dinner party, not orchestrating a murder. "Clinton," she said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern. "What on earth are you doing down here, and with Grace of all people?" Dr. Hayes appeared behind her, carrying a small medical bag. His expression was clinical, detached, as though he were about to perform a routine examination rather than end a man's life. Clinton stepped in front of Grace. "I know what you did. I know about Ulani. I heard everything you said upstairs." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise, perhaps? Or calculation? Then the mask slipped back into place. "Sweetheart, you're not making any sense," she said softly. She turned to the guards with a sad shake of her head. "He's been under tremendous stress with the Chicago deal. I was afraid this might happen. The symptoms of a nervous breakdown can appear suddenly." "I'm not having a breakdown," Clinton shouted. "You poisoned my first wife. You've been planning to do the same to me." Victoria sighed. "Dr. Hayes, I think we need to sedate him, for his own safety." Hayes opened his medical bag and withdrew a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This will help you relax, Mr. Whitfield. Just a mild sedative to calm your nerves." Clinton backed away, but the guards moved in, grabbing his arms and forcing him to his knees. He struggled against their grip, but they were stronger, younger, trained for exactly this kind of confrontation. "Grace," Victoria said, turning to the maid with cold eyes. "I always suspected you were more observant than you let on. That was my mistake." She nodded to one of the guards. "Take her to the storage room and lock her in. We'll deal with her after we've handled my husband." Grace tried to resist, but the guard dragged her away by the arm. As she disappeared through a doorway, she caught Clinton's eye one last time. There was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read. Determination, maybe, or a silent promise. Then the door slammed shut, and she was gone. Victoria crouched down in front of Clinton, tilting her head as if examining a curious specimen. "You know, I really did like you, Clinton. You were kind, generous, so eager to believe the best in people. It made everything so easy." Clinton spat at her feet. "You won't get away with this. People will investigate." "Will they?" Victoria smiled. "A billionaire dies of a heart attack 2 years after his first wife died of the same condition. Tragic, but not suspicious. Grief takes a terrible toll on the body. The medical examiner will find nothing unusual. Your board of directors will send flowers, and I will inherit everything I deserve." She stood up and stepped back, gesturing for Dr. Hayes to proceed. The doctor approached with the syringe, his movements practiced and precise. "This will be over quickly, Mr. Whitfield. I promise you won't feel a thing." Clinton watched the needle come closer. His phone was in his pocket, but his arms were pinned. The evidence was sitting in Grace's old smartphone, locked away in a storage room, with the only witness who could corroborate his story. He had always believed that money and power could protect him from anything. He had been so certain that his fortress was impregnable, his position unassailable. But in the end, he was just a man on his knees waiting for the needle that would stop his heart. Hayes grabbed Clinton's arm and positioned the syringe against a vein. In the storage room at the far end of the basement, Grace pressed her back against the locked door and reached into her apron pocket. The old smartphone was still there. The guards had been too focused on Clinton to search her properly. She pulled out the phone and stared at the screen. 17% battery. Enough for one message. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a text to Derek Thompson, the head of security who had been sent away on a fabricated family emergency. She attached the most damning audio file and pressed send. The message status changed to delivered. Now all she could do was pray that Derek would see it in time. The needle was an inch from Clinton's skin when Victoria raised her hand. "Wait," she said. Dr. Hayes looked up irritated. "We should do this quickly. The longer we wait, the more complications could arise." Victoria walked slowly around Clinton, studying him with the detached curiosity of a collector examining a flawed acquisition. "I've waited 3 years for this moment, Leonard. I want to savor it." She crouched down until her face was level with his. "Do you know what the hardest part was, Clinton? Not the planning, not the waiting. It was pretending to love you." Her lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Every morning waking up next to you, every night listening to you talk about Ulani like she was some kind of saint. It was exhausting." Clinton stared at the woman he had married and saw nothing but a stranger. Every memory they had shared together now felt contaminated, poisoned by the truth of what she was. "Ulani trusted you," he said quietly. "She thought you were her friend." Victoria laughed. "Ulani was weak. She had everything and did nothing with it. All that money, all that influence, and she spent her days doing charity work and baking cookies for the staff." She glanced toward the storage room where Grace was locked away. "She even paid for her maid's daughter to have surgery. Can you imagine wasting $50,000 on a servant's child?" The contempt in her voice made Clinton's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. Every second Victoria spent gloating was another second Grace had to reach Derek somehow. "And me?" Clinton asked. "What was I to you?" Victoria stood up and smoothed her silk robe. "You were the prize, Clinton. The billion-dollar prize. Ulani was just the obstacle I had to remove to claim it." She nodded to Hayes. "Now do it. I'm tired of looking at him." 30 miles away, Derek Thompson sat on the edge of his bed staring at his phone. Sleep had eluded him for hours. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The family emergency that had pulled him away from the estate had turned out to be nothing. His mother was fine. His sister was fine. When he had arrived at their home, they had been confused by his sudden appearance, insisting they had never called for help. Someone had lied to get him away from the mansion. Derek had tried calling Clinton directly, but the phone went straight to voicemail. He had tried the main house line, but no one answered. He had even called the gate security, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, claiming everything was normal. Nothing about this was normal. At 17 minutes past 1 in the morning, Derek's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was a number he didn't recognize, but something made him open it anyway. The text was brief. "Mr. Clinton is being harmed. Mrs. Victoria killed Mrs. Ulani. Evidence in this phone. Please help." Attached was an audio file. Derek pressed play and listened to Victoria's voice discussing untraceable compounds and natural heart failure. He listened to Dr. Hayes explaining the dosage adjustments. He listened to them laughing about how easy Ulani had been to deceive. By the time the recording ended, Derek was already pulling on his shoes and reaching for his service weapon. He dialed 911 while sprinting to his car. Back in the basement, Hayes pushed the needle against Clinton's vein. The cold steel broke the surface of his skin, and Clinton felt the pressure of the syringe beginning to depress. "This is it," he thought. "This is how I die." Then the security alarm screamed to life. Red lights flashed throughout the basement as the mansion's perimeter breach system activated. Someone had forced their way through the main gate. Victoria's head snapped toward the staircase. "What is that? Who's at the gate?" One of the guards pulled out his radio. "Control, what's happening up there?" Static crackled, followed by panicked shouting. "Multiple vehicles approaching. Looks like police. They're coming in fast." Victoria's composure shattered. "That's impossible. How would they know?" Clinton felt the needle withdraw from his arm as Hayes stumbled backward in confusion. The guards released their grip on him, torn between restraining their captive and responding to the new threat. It was all the opening Clinton needed. He drove his elbow into the stomach of the guard on his left, then swung his fist into the jaw of the guard on his right. Both men staggered, and Clinton scrambled to his feet, putting distance between himself and his captors. "Stop him!" Victoria screamed. But it was too late. The basement door burst open and Derek Thompson descended the stairs with 4 police officers behind him, weapons drawn. "Nobody move!" Derek shouted. "Put your hands where I can see them!" Victoria's guards reached for their guns. The first shot was fired by the guard Clinton had elbowed, his bullet going wide and striking the concrete wall. Derek returned fire with deadly precision, hitting the man in the shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground. The second guard raised his weapon, but 2 officers tackled him before he could pull the trigger. In the chaos, Dr. Hayes made a break for the storage room at the far end of the basement. Clinton saw him reaching into his medical bag, pulling out a lighter and a handful of papers. "He's trying to destroy evidence," Clinton shouted. One of the officers intercepted Hayes before he could set the documents ablaze. The lighter clattered to the floor, and Hayes was thrown against the wall, his hands wrenched behind his back. Victoria tried to slip away during the confusion, moving toward the narrow staircase that led to the kitchen above. Derek stepped into her path, blocking her escape. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Whitfield." Victoria's eyes darted around the basement, searching for any way out. When she found none, her expression shifted. The mask of the grieving wife, the concerned partner, the loving spouse, fell away entirely. What remained was cold, calculating fury. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed at Derek. "I will destroy you. I will destroy everyone in this room." Derek didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for the murder of Ulani Whitfield and the attempted murder of Clinton Whitfield. You have the right to remain silent." As the officer finished reading Victoria her rights, Clinton ran to the storage room and pounded on the door. Grace, are you in there?" "I'm here," came the muffled response. "The door is locked from the outside." Clinton found the bolt and threw it open. Grace stumbled out, clutching the old smartphone that had saved both their lives. When she saw the police officers and the handcuffed figures of Victoria and Dr. Hayes, her knees buckled with relief. Clinton caught her before she could fall. "You did it," he said. "Your message reached Derek in time." Grace looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "I wasn't sure it would work. I just kept praying." Across the basement, Victoria was being led toward the stairs in handcuffs. She caught Clinton's eye and held his gaze with venomous intensity. "You think this is over," she said. "You think you've won something. Ulani was dying anyway. I just accelerated the process. And you would have been dead within the year regardless. The only difference is that now I won't get to spend your money." Clinton walked toward her slowly. The guards tensed, but he raised his hand to show he meant no harm. He stopped 3 feet away from the woman he had once believed he loved. "Ulani wasn't dying," he said quietly. "She was getting better before you and Hayes started poisoning her. I remember now. The doctors were optimistic. She was talking about traveling, about all the things we would do together." His voice cracked slightly. "You took everything from her. You took everything from me. And for what money you never earned, a life you didn't build." Victoria's smile was thin and cruel. "Money is the only thing that matters, Clinton. Everything else is just decoration." The officers pulled her up the stairs, and Clinton watched her go. He felt no satisfaction in her arrest, no sense of justice fulfilled, only a hollow ache where his heart used to be. The days that followed passed in a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and media attention. The story of the billionaire's murderous wife dominated headlines across the country. Victoria and Dr. Hayes were both charged with first-degree murder for Ulani's death and attempted murder for the plot against Clinton. The evidence Grace had collected over 2 years was more than enough to ensure they would never see freedom again. During the trial, Victoria finally dropped all pretense of innocence. She testified with chilling detachment about how she had befriended Ulani specifically to get close to Clinton, how she had seduced Dr. Hayes to gain access to the medical knowledge she needed, how she had spent months slowly poisoning Ulani with compounds that mimicked natural heart disease. "I did what I had to do," she said from the witness stand. "Ulani was in my way. Clinton was a means to an end. I don't expect any of you to understand." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Victoria received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Hayes received the same sentence. 1 week after the verdict, Clinton found Grace in the kitchen of the mansion, packing her belongings into a small suitcase. She had been staying in one of the guest rooms since the night of the arrest, but now she seemed determined to leave. "Where are you going?" Clinton asked. Grace kept her eyes on her suitcase.
"I've done what I needed to do, Mr. Whitfield. Mrs. Ulani can rest now, and you're safe. There's no reason for me to stay."
Clinton leaned against the door frame.
"What if I asked you to stay? I'm just a maid, sir. You don't need me anymore."
"You're wrong," Clinton said. He crossed the room and gently took the suitcase from her hands. "You're the only person who saw the truth when everyone else was blind. You risked your life to save mine. You spent 2 years gathering evidence while living under the same roof as a killer." He set the suitcase aside. "You're not just a maid, Grace. You're family." Grace finally looked up at him. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears.
"Mrs. Ulani used to say that people should help each other because it's the right thing to do," she said softly. "I just did what she would have done."
Clinton nodded. "Then stay. Not as a maid, as the head of this household, as someone I trust completely." Grace was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. That night, Clinton stood alone in the master bedroom holding a photograph of Ulani. It had been taken on their 5th anniversary, her smile radiant, her eyes full of the warmth that had first drawn him to her. He had spent 3 years grieving her death, never knowing that her killer slept beside him every night. He had surrounded himself with security systems and bodyguards, never realizing that the greatest threat was already inside his walls. In the end, the person who saved him was not his wealth, not his power, not his carefully constructed fortress of money and influence. It was a quiet woman who moved through his house like a shadow, who remembered a kindness shown to her daughter, who whispered 2 words in the darkness that changed everything. "Don't talk." Clinton placed the photograph back on the nightstand and walked to the window. The estate stretched out before him, lit by the soft glow of the moon. Somewhere in the east wing, Grace was settling into her new quarters, no longer a servant, but a guardian. He thought about Ulani's words, the ones Grace had repeated to him in the basement. People should help each other, because it's the right thing to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, Clinton allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live again.